The tip line has received more than 18,000 calls. The FBI's most advanced forensic laboratory is now processing evidence from the scene, and the woman at the center of all of it has been missing for over 80 days. This is where the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping investigation stands. And for a case that began with what appeared to be a straightforward criminal act in an Arizona neighborhood, the path since then has been anything but straight. Nancy Guthrie is an elderly woman. She is the mother of one of the most recognizable faces in American morning television. When she went missing, the combination of her family's public profile and the violence implied in a forced disappearance put this story immediately at the top of the national consciousness. Federal investigators were brought in. The FBI took the lead, and what began as a missing person situation was formally treated as a kidnapping. That classification matters. It changes the investigative framework. It changes which agencies get involved. It changes the legal exposure of anyone found responsible. And in this case, it triggered the deployment of one of the most intensive investigative operations seen in a regional kidnapping case in years. And yet, here we are, more than 2.5 months later, no arrest, no public identification of a suspect, no confirmed account of where Nancy Guthrie is or what has happened to her. What we do have is a layered and complicated body of developing information. Physical evidence that has been collected and analyzed, with some of it now at the nation's foremost forensic laboratory. Ransom communications that analysts say reflect a specific and troubling behavioral pattern. 2 individuals connected to the Guthrie family who have re-entered public focus. And a ransom note whose central claim, that Nancy Guthrie is dead, has not been confirmed or denied by law enforcement. This story requires careful handling. In a case with this level of public attention, the distance between what is known and what is speculated has been difficult to maintain. The FBI itself has had to intervene in the information environment, issuing a statement indicating that some evidence being described publicly as new was not, in the Bureau's assessment, new at all. Understanding this case means understanding that gap between the investigation as it exists inside federal law enforcement and the investigation as it is being narrated publicly. Those 2 versions of events have not always matched, and the distance between them matters for how this story is understood. We begin at the beginning, with what happened at Nancy Guthrie's home, with what investigators found when they arrived, and with the initial steps of an investigation that has grown into something far more complex than its opening days suggested. If you have been following this case since it began, stay with us. The picture being assembled now is different from the one that existed weeks ago, and those differences are significant. The home of Nancy Guthrie is where this investigation began, and in important ways, it is where the most significant physical evidence still originates. When investigators processed the scene in the early days of the case, they were looking for anything that could tell them who had been inside that home, what had happened, and where the people responsible might have gone. The results of that initial sweep were described as promising in one specific dimension. Hair samples recovered from within the residence were flagged. The language used was potentially critical. In forensic terms, that is not an overstatement. It is a carefully measured assessment. Hair evidence carries what forensic professionals call a dual potential. If a root is present, mitochondrial or nuclear DNA may be extractable. That DNA, if it produces a usable profile, can then be compared against known samples or run through databases maintained by law enforcement. A match would be significant. A partial match could still narrow a field. The absence of a match is not the end of the road, but it requires investigators to pursue other avenues. In this case, the initial analysis of the hair evidence did not produce an identification. That result prompted the next step. The evidence was packaged and sent to the FBI laboratory at Quantico, Virginia. Quantico is not a general-purpose laboratory. It is the FBI's flagship scientific operation. The analysts there work on the most complex evidentiary challenges in federal criminal investigations. The fact that evidence from the Nancy Guthrie case was routed there signals clearly that federal investigators believe the physical material from the scene may hold the key to identifying whoever is responsible. There is an additional layer to the forensic dimension of this case that has drawn outside attention. The laboratory associated with DNA analysis in the long-running Gilgo Beach serial murder investigation, a case that stretched across decades before finally reaching a conviction in recent years, has now been referenced in connection with the Nancy Guthrie matter. The nature of that connection is not fully clear from available public reporting, but the reference is notable because the Gilgo Beach case was, in part, defined by the forensic complexity of extracting meaningful DNA profiles from difficult evidence over an extended period of time. The parallel, whether intentional or coincidental, raises a question. Is the forensic challenge in the Nancy Guthrie case comparable in its complexity to cases where DNA resolution has taken years rather than months? Investigators have not said, but the involvement of advanced forensic resources suggests they are, not treating this as a routine evidence processing task. Meanwhile, the FBI's recent public statement introduced an important qualification into the evidence conversation. The Bureau indicated that certain information being presented in public reporting as new evidence in the case was not, in their view, actually new. This matters for several reasons. First, it suggests that public reporting on this case has, at times, gotten ahead of where the investigation actually is. Second, it creates uncertainty about which pieces of reported evidence are genuinely current. And third, it demonstrates that the FBI is paying attention to the public information environment and is willing to push back when the record drifts from what they know. That willingness to correct the public record is itself informative. It suggests that investigators are concerned about the effects of inaccurate information on the case. In kidnapping investigations, the public dimension matters. It can affect whether witnesses come forward, whether potential suspects feel secure, and whether the family of the victim is subjected to unnecessary additional distress. The physical evidence picture is promising material has been recovered. It is being analyzed at the highest level of forensic capability available in this country. No result has been announced. The work continues. What happens next in the laboratory may determine the direction of this entire investigation. And that process is not one that can be hurried. Ahead, the communication trail, the ransom note, what its language tells analysts, and the specific profile that former FBI personnel have begun to construct around whoever wrote it. In kidnapping cases, communication is both essential and revealing. The people responsible for taking someone make demands. They establish contact, and in doing so, they expose information about themselves. Not always enough, not always in time, but something. The way a person communicates under pressure reveals patterns that trained analysts can read. In the Nancy Guthrie case, the communication trail has been one of the most discussed and most troubling aspects of the investigation. A ransom note emerged that, according to available reporting, contained a claim that Nancy Guthrie has died. The precise language of the note, its full content and structure, has not been publicly released. What has been reported is the central claim it makes and the general framework in which it was delivered. Law enforcement has not confirmed what the note says about Nancy Guthrie's status. That silence is significant. The FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department have both been cautious in their public statements about the ransom communication. They have not said the claim is false. They have not said it is true. They have said, in essence, that the investigation continues. When former federal agents with kidnapping case experience analyze this kind of communication, they look for patterns. What was the tone? Was the language internally consistent? Did the demands make operational sense? Did the timing of the communication align with what would be expected if the claim were genuine? The analysis from former investigative professionals who have commented publicly on this case points in a consistent direction. The behavior of the individuals responsible, as seen through the communications, has not been straightforward. The phrase that keeps appearing in expert commentary is bad faith. The people behind this, analysts say, appear to have been operating without honest intent from the beginning of the ransom process. In kidnapping cases, communication is both essential and revealing. The people responsible for taking someone make demands, they establish contact, and in doing so, they expose information about themselves. Not always enough, not always in time, but something. The way a person communicates under pressure reveals patterns that trained analysts can read. In the Nancy Guthrie case, the communication trail has been one of the most discussed and most troubling aspects of the investigation. A ransom note emerged that, according to available reporting, contained a claim that Nancy Guthrie has died. The precise language of the note, its full content and structure, has not been publicly released. What has been reported is the central claim it makes and the general framework in which it was delivered. Law enforcement has not confirmed what the note says about Nancy Guthrie's status. That silence is significant. The FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department have both been cautious in their public statements about the ransom communication. They have not said the claim is false. They have not said it is true. They have said, in essence, that the investigation continues. When former federal agents with kidnapping case experience analyze this kind of communication, they look for patterns. What was the tone? Was the language internally consistent? Did the demands make operational sense? Did the timing of the communication align with what would be expected if the claim were genuine? The analysis from former investigative professionals who have commented publicly on this case points in a consistent direction. The behavior of the individuals responsible, as seen through the communications, has not been straightforward. The phrase that keeps appearing in expert commentary is bad faith. The people behind this, analysts say, appear to have been operating without honest intent from the beginning of the ransom process. There is a specific dynamic that plays out in almost every major missing persons and kidnapping investigation. At a certain point, the investigative and public lens turns toward those who knew the victim. Not necessarily because they are assumed to be responsible, but because people close to a victim are often the source of information that makes the broader picture comprehensible. In the Nancy Guthrie case, that inward turn has focused most consistently on two names, Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni. These two individuals have been discussed in connection with this case in a variety of contexts. Former FBI agents commenting publicly have addressed them by name. Investigative reports have returned to them repeatedly, and their presence in the public conversation about this case has not diminished as the weeks have passed. If anything, they have come back into sharper focus. What is important to establish clearly is the nature of their status in this investigation, as it is publicly known. Neither Annie Guthrie nor Tommaso Cioni has been publicly charged with any crime in connection with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. There is no publicly issued arrest warrant tied to their names in the context of this case. The scrutiny they are under exists within the investigation and within public analysis. It does not, at this time, exist within the formal charging structure of the criminal justice system. That distinction matters significantly. Scrutiny is not guilt. Analytical focus is not an indictment. What former federal agents have offered in public commentary is a framework for why these individuals warrant continued attention. It centers on proximity, on knowledge, on what people who are close to a victim might have seen, heard, or known before the disappearance occurred. In kidnapping cases, the people with the most detailed knowledge of a victim's routines, vulnerabilities, and domestic circumstances are often those who were closest to them. The expert commentary on Tommaso Cioni in particular has addressed questions of behavioral and circumstantial observation. Without official confirmation of what specifically is being examined, the public analysis has focused on the consistency of available information about his movements and awareness in the relevant period. Nancy Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni have not been passive in the face of this attention. According to available reporting, both have issued statements. Those communications were described as carrying the character of a clear and firm message. Whether that communication was directed at investigators, at the public, at media, or at all three is not entirely clear from available reporting. But the decision to issue such a statement reflects an awareness of their position in this case and a choice to address it directly. The Pima County Sheriff's Department's role in this investigation has become complicated by a separate matter. The department, which has faced its own institutional challenges, drew significant criticism after the sheriff posted content on social media that was widely described as inappropriate given the circumstances of this ongoing case. A post referencing the name Nancy in a context that observers across the political spectrum found deeply unsuitable generated substantial negative reaction. The department subsequently released a statement citing technical issues in connection with the post. The precise nature of those technical issues and how they relate to what was published has not been explained in available reporting in a way that resolved the public concern. For an agency already navigating a major federal investigation on its territory, the episode introduced an additional layer of institutional difficulty. Police patrols in the neighborhood where Nancy Guthrie lived have been increased. That step is standard procedure in ongoing investigations of this kind. It signals continued law enforcement presence. It may also signal specific concern about activity in the area, whether connected to the original crime or to subsequent movements of individuals under scrutiny. The involvement of the White House has added another dimension to the public record of this case. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that the president reviewed images connected to a potential suspect in the Guthrie investigation. The reaction attributed to the president upon reviewing those images was described in terms reflecting strong, negative feeling about what was seen. That reaction has not been followed by any publicly announced specific action tied to the investigation. But the fact of that involvement at the executive level reflects the scale of attention this case has attracted. Before we go further, if you have stayed with this story from the beginning, you already understand that cases like this one do not resolve themselves quickly. If this reporting is something you find valuable, consider subscribing. New developments in this case will be covered as they happen. Here is the picture at 80 days. An investigation that began with a kidnapping classification and the deployment of federal resources has, over the course of nearly 3 months, produced a body of evidence, a set of contested claims, and a behavioral profile of whoever is responsible, without producing a public identification or an arrest. That is not a failure of investigative effort. The tip line alone, with 18,000 calls, represents a staggering volume of public engagement. The deployment of Quantico-level forensic resources is a direct signal of how seriously the Bureau is treating the physical evidence. The active push for security footage from the neighborhood reflects continued investigative momentum. But effort and resolution are not the same thing. The Nancy Guthrie case is, at this moment, a case that is working hard without having yet arrived. The ransom note claiming she is dead sits at the center of a profound ambiguity. Law enforcement has not confirmed it. They have not denied it. The family has not received a definitive answer, and everyone watching this case from outside is left holding the same uncertainty that the family is living with. Former investigators have made clear that bad faith ransom situations, where the communications from those responsible are designed to manipulate rather than to reach a genuine transaction, are among the most difficult categories of kidnapping cases to resolve. The uncertainty is by design, the confusion is intentional, and the psychological toll on both investigators and family members is substantial. The forensic path is the most promising avenue available at this point. Hair evidence at Quantico. Analysis by the Bureau's most capable scientific personnel. If a profile is extracted and a match is found, the direction of the investigation could shift significantly. That process takes time. It cannot be accelerated beyond what the science allows. And while it proceeds, the calendar keeps moving. Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni remain figures whose role in this story is not fully resolved in the public record. They are named, they are analyzed, they have issued statements, and neither of them has been charged. The tension between their presence in the conversation and their absence from the formal charging record is one of the open threads that this investigation has not yet tied off. The Pima County Sheriff's Department, the agency on whose territory this crime occurred, has introduced its own complications into the broader picture. Social media episode, the subsequent statement citing technical issues, and the pre-existing institutional challenges facing the department have created friction at the local level of an investigation primarily being led by federal authorities. The White House has seen images connected to a potential suspect. 18,000 people have called a tip line. Hair evidence is being processed at the FBI's most advanced laboratory. Law enforcement patrols are increased in the neighborhood where an elderly woman was taken from her home. And Nancy Guthrie is still missing. There is no resolution to offer at the end of this reporting. There is only the state of things as they are. Active, uncertain, pressing forward, with the weight of 80 days behind it and no clear timeline for when those days will produce the answer everyone is waiting for. The investigation continues. The family continues to wait. And the questions that opened this story remain the questions that close it.